Usually when we talk about history, we tend to focus on the winners, the people who wrote the books, the generals who won the wars, the emperors who built the monuments.
Right, the ones left standing at the end of the day.
Exactly. But today, for this deep dive, we are looking at a stack of sources that, well, they focus on a moment of total catastrophic defeat. Or at least, that's what it looked like to everyone standing in Jerusalem around 30 AD.
It really is the ultimate paradox. We're looking at a single night where the entire legal, religious, and political system of the ancient world basically conspired to crush one man. It's a collision of kingdoms, really.
Yeah, you have the kingdom of heaven represented by a bound prisoner standing in front of the kingdom of the world, which is represented by judges who are, well, let's just say they are less than objective.
Less than objective is putting it very politely. I mean, based on all the historical and textual data we have, we are talking about blatant corruption, illegal night hearings, and a judicial process that would make a kangaroo court look dignified.
A complete sham. But here's the hook for what we're doing today and why I'm so excited for you guys listening. We aren't just reading one account. We actually have 4 distinct sources: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the really fascinating thing is, they do not tell the story the exact same way.
And, that is the key to their authenticity.
Yeah.
Because if they were identical, you'd immediately suspect collusion.
Oh, for sure. Like if 4 people walk into a police precinct to report a crime and they use the exact same vocabulary, the detective knows they rehearsed it in the car.
Exactly. But here, they are wonderfully distinct. They're like 4 witnesses at a crime scene standing on 4 entirely different street corners. They see the same event, but the angle dictates what details pop out to them.
I really like that image. So our mission today is to synthesize those 4 views. We need to figure out why they differ and how they fit together into this one incredibly dark night. And from what I gathered in the prep, we can basically categorize them.
We can.
Right. So Matthew gives us Jesus as the rejected king. Mark is showing us the suffering servant. Luke has this deep psychological focus on him as the ultimate perfect man. And John is just John.
John is doing something totally different from the other 3. He pulls back the curtain to show us the divine Son. He wants to show us that even while he is being physically arrested and bound, Jesus is actually the one running the show. He's the one managing the logistics.
It's a wild contrast. So let's set the stage geographically before we get too deep into the theology. Jesus has just been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. The chaos of the swords and the torches is settling down. The disciples have scattered. Now the guards have to move him. Where exactly are they going?
They are crossing the Kidron Valley. So if you're picturing this, it's the middle of the night, it's pitch black outside, likely very cold. They're dragging Jesus from the garden on the Mount of Olives down into the valley floor, and then they have to physically march up the stone stairs into the upper city of Jerusalem.
Which is the wealthy district, right?
Right, precisely. This is where the aristocrats, the high priests, the ruling class lived. They had these massive, fortress-like courtyard homes.
And while they are making this grueling walk, the text explicitly says the disciples fled, which immediately brings Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7 to mind. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. The prophetic fulfillment is just happening in real time.
It is. But the sources also tell us it wasn't a total 100% abandonment. 2 of them actually turned back. Peter and another disciple, who is almost universally understood to be John, decide to follow.
Right, but we have to be really careful with how we read that word following. They aren't walking next to Jesus in solidarity, demanding to be arrested with him. They are essentially shadowing the group.
Right, they are lurking. And this is where those 4 distinct portraits really start to emerge in the text. Let's start with Matthew's perspective.
Okay, so Matthew 26, verse 58 says Peter followed, quote, to see the end.
And that phrase, to see the end, is actually chilling when you sit with it. Remember, Matthew presents Jesus as the King of the Jews. He emphasizes the royal lineage, the fulfillment of Jewish law. So here, Peter is acting as a subject of that king, but he's watching the regime fall.
Wow, so it's not a hopeful following at all.
No, it's morbid curiosity. He's cautious. He wants to know how the coup plays out. Is the king going to call down fire? Is it totally over? He's a spectator to a royal tragedy.
Okay, so Matthew gives us the cautious subject watching the train wreck. What about Mark? Because Mark is usually our action guy, the fast-paced, breathless gospel.
Well, Mark gives us a sensory detail that is just devastating. In Mark 14.54, he focuses on a physical sensation. He tells us Peter was, quote, warming himself at the fire.
Which seems like such a throwaway line when you first read it. Like, okay, it was cold out, so he got warm. Why does that specific detail matter?
Because you have to think about the contrast Mark is building. Mark portrays Jesus as the suffering servant. Inside the estate, the servant is facing cold, harsh, brutal judgment. He's being stripped of his rights. But outside, the servant disciple, Peter, is seeking physical comfort in the enemy's camp.
Oh, man. He's prioritizing his own physical body over his loyalty. He's literally getting cozy with the very guards who just arrested his master.
Precisely. It highlights the absolute frailty of the human servant when the divine master is suffering. And then you move over to Luke. Luke is the doctor, the historian, the one incredibly interested in humanity and compassion.
Right, and Luke 22.54 emphasizes the phrase, following at a distance.
Yes. In Luke, Jesus is the perfect man. He is the ultimate friend of sinners. Peter is his close friend. So this phrase, following at a distance, emphasizes a relational gap. The psychological distance is growing with every single step they take up that hill.
It's not just that he's 50 yards behind the procession. It's that his heart is drifting miles away from his friend.
Exactly. And finally, you have John. John always seems to have the backstage pass to everything.
He really does. John chapter 18 actually explains the logistics of the night, because I've always wondered, reading this, how they even got into the courtyard in the first place. This is the high priest's house. It's practically a fortress. It's heavily guarded. You can't just stroll in during a high-profile, state-sponsored arrest.
You definitely can't. But John tells us that the other disciple, meaning himself, was actually known to the high priest. He personally speaks to the servant girl at the door and vouches for Peter to get him inside.
Now, hold on, I have to stop you there. Because John is a fisherman from Galilee. He's a blue-collar guy from the north. How on earth does he know the high priest of Israel, the most powerful religious billionaire in the capital? That sounds like a massive stretch.
It does sound odd to our modern ears. But remember, Zebedee's fishing business wasn't just a guy with a pole. It was a significant commercial enterprise. There's a very strong historical tradition that they supplied the salted fish for the wealthy priestly families in Jerusalem. It was a high-end business connection.
So John is essentially the fish vendor.
Exactly. The guards are like, oh, that's John, the fish guy's son, let him in. But the theological point John is making here is paramount. Jesus isn't a victim of random, chaotic circumstances. There is immense order here. Even in the arrest, even in the mundane logistics of who gets through the gate, there is a divine hand at work.
Because Jesus is the divine Son. He is entering this trial, and his witnesses are present precisely because God ordained those business connections decades prior.
Yes, so we have the king's subject watching the end, the servant's follower seeking comfort, the perfect man's friend drifting away, and the witness to the divine getting a front row seat. But they all share this incredibly dangerous common thread of following at a distance.
And that is a convicting thought for anyone listening. Following at a distance is always the precursor to outright denial. It represents spiritual compromise. You want to be associated with Jesus just enough to see what happens, but far enough away to run if the heat gets turned up.
It's trying to have one foot in both kingdoms.
Right.
And as we'll see, that never works out.
It never does. We'll definitely come back to Peter's collapse, but let's shift focus back to where Jesus is actually being taken. The soldiers haul him up the stairs into the wealthy district. Now, you would assume they take him straight to Caiaphas, the current high priest, since he's the one who ordered the arrest. But John tells us they make a pit stop first.
Right, and only John mentions this preliminary hearing. They take him to see a man named Annas.
Let's really flesh out who this guy is, because looking at the historical prep for this deep dive, Annas is described as the godfather of the priesthood. Is that a fair comparison, or are historians just being dramatic?
Honestly, it is barely dramatic enough. Annas is a fascinating and frankly terrifying historical figure. He was actually the high priest years prior, from about 6 AD to 15 AD. But the Roman authorities deposed him.
Why did the Romans fire him?
He simply became too powerful. The Romans liked to cycle through high priests every few years to keep any one local family from gaining too much political influence over the Jewish populace. But here's the catch. In Jewish biblical law, the high priesthood is a lifetime appointment. You don't just retire from being the sole intermediary between God and man. The anointing oil is on you until you die.
So the Romans officially fired him, but the Jewish people and the entire religious infrastructure still saw him as the legitimate guy calling the shot.
Exactly. He is the ultimate power behind the throne. He managed to get 5 of his own sons, and now his son-in-law Caiaphas, appointed as high priest over the years. He's running an absolute dynasty. But it's not just about religious prestige. It is about staggering amounts of money.
Right. The bazaar of the sons of Annas. I saw that phrase pop up a lot in the research.
Yes. We actually have historical records from the Talmud, where later rabbis explicitly complained about the corruption of the booths of Annas. This family controlled the entire temple market.
Yeah.
So think back to earlier in the week when Jesus flips the tables and drives the money changers out of the temple courts with a whip.
Oh, wow. So he wasn't just disrupting a church service. He was directly disrupting Annas's personal revenue stream.
He was hitting them right in the wallet. You have to understand, the temple functioned as the central bank of Judea. It was a massive corporate monopoly. Every Jewish male had to pay the temple tax in a very specific, approved currency, the Tyrian shekel.
And they charged a massive exchange rate for that, right?
Astronomical exchange rates. And then you had to buy a blemish-free animal for your sacrifice, which conveniently could only be certified by the temple priests.
It was a literal racketeering scheme. You bring your own sheep from home, the priest looks at it and says, sorry, it has a blemish, invalid, so you are forced to buy their pre-approved sheep at a massive markup.
Precisely. And Annas got a cut of every single transaction that happened in that courtyard. So when Jesus publicly attacks that trade, he isn't just being a theological nuisance. He is a severe economic threat to the most powerful family in the country.
So when Jesus is standing before Annas in this midnight off-the-books hearing, it is deeply personal. This isn't a neutral judge looking for civic justice. This is a corrupt CEO dealing with a whistleblower who is tanking the company stock.
That is a perfect modern analogy. And notice exactly what Annas asks him about. John 18:19 says, the high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine.
He's on a fishing expedition.
Completely fishing. He wants a conspiracy charge. He wants names. Who are your disciples? How big is this underground movement? And he wants a heresy charge. What is this secret subversive doctrine you're teaching the peasants?
But look at how Jesus responds to this intimidation. This is that divine perspective John highlights. Jesus flat out refuses to act like a conspirator. He says, I spoke openly to the world. I taught in synagogues, and in the temple I spoke nothing in secret.
He's effectively holding up a mirror and saying, I'm not the one hiding in the shadows here. You are. You arrest me in the dead of night. You bring me to a private, unrecorded meeting at your house. I taught in the public square every single day.
He's actively challenging the legality of the entire proceeding.
Yes, he is. Because in Jewish jurisprudence, you do not ask the defendant to testify against himself. That is a fundamental, foundational right. You are required to bring forward witnesses to build the case. So Jesus says, why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me. He is completely flipping the script. The bound prisoner is suddenly instructing the judge on proper legal procedure.
And that kind of intellectual dominance earns him a physical response.
It does. One of the officers standing nearby strikes Jesus in the face with the palm of his hand. This is the very first physical blow recorded in the Passion narrative.
It's so shocking. To slap a prisoner who hasn't even been formally charged yet, it just shows the raw hostility in the room.
It's an act of deep contempt. It's the officer essentially saying, don't you know who you were talking to? This is Annas. Show some respect to the Godfather. And it also fulfills Micah 5.1, which prophesied that they would strike the judge of Israel with a rod on the cheek.
But wait, I have to challenge this moment based on Jesus' own teachings. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus explicitly taught, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. But here, he doesn't turn the other cheek in silence. He actively challenges the guy. He says, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if, well, why do you strike me? Is he contradicting his own sermon?
That is such a brilliant question, and people stumble over it all the time. But the answer is no. He isn't contradicting himself. Turning the other cheek is about forsaking personal retaliation. It's about not taking physical revenge. But it does not mean surrendering to injustice or lying down and letting falsehood win.
So he isn't striking back physically. He isn't throwing a punch at the guard.
Exactly. He absorbs the blow. But he demands that the truth be honored. He's saying, the law actually matters. If I lied, prove it legally. If I told the truth, you are breaking the law by assaulting me. He is exposing the hypocrisy of the entire system.
So he's defending the objective truth, not his own personal ego.
Precisely. It shows that even while in chains, Jesus is the one in absolute control. He is intellectually and morally superior to every single person in that room. And Annas realizes he's outmatched, so he binds him and sends him across the courtyard to Caiaphas.
Okay, so while Jesus is inside, standing incredibly firm for the truth, we have to cut away to the courtyard outside. Because the narrative is happening on two tracks simultaneously. It's like a split screen in a movie. Jesus is inside, holding it perfectly together. Peter is outside, utterly falling apart.
It is the ultimate human contrast. And to really understand what's happening with Peter, we need to slow down. It's easy for us to just read it and say, oh, Peter denied Jesus, but we need to understand the theological and psychological mechanism of why it happened.
And I want to dig into this specific analogy from the source material we reviewed. It talks about monopoly money. When I first read that in our prep notes, I thought it was a bit abstract, maybe a little weird. But the more I processed it, the more it perfectly explained the theology of sin here. Explain this concept for everyone listening.
Sure. So think of it this way. Sin creates a real, tangible debt. That is standard biblical language. Forgive us our debts, right? You owe something to divine justice because you have violated the moral law of the universe.
Right. There is a cosmic bill to pay.
Exactly. Now, most human beings throughout history try to pay that debt with their own personal currency. We think, okay, I messed up, but I'll do better next time, or I'll give more to charity. Or, in Peter's specific case, I will defend Jesus with my sword. I will literally die for him.
He's offering his own willpower, his own bravery, his own zealous actions as payment.
Yes, but in the economy of heaven, human willpower and human righteousness have zero purchasing power.
Yeah.
It's counterfeit. It's monopoly money.
It looks like money to us. We feel really good about our New Year's resolutions and our brave declarations.
Right, but you cannot walk into the bank of heaven and deposit it. It has no value because it is stained by the exact same fallen nature that created the debt in the first place. You need authentic currency, a perfect sinless life, and an atoning death.
So Peter is standing out by this fire, freezing, terrified, and he's realizing, maybe for the very first time in his life, that his pockets are completely full of fake cash. He promised unmatched bravery, but he is terrified of a teenage servant girl. He promised unwavering loyalty, but he is hiding in the shadows trying to blend in.
He is discovering that he is spiritually bankrupt. And the utter tragedy of the scene is that he is trying to save himself by denying the only person in the universe who actually has the real currency to pay his debt.
Man, that is the deepest irony of the night. Jesus is inside, literally in the process of paying the debt, paying for Peter's sin, and Peter is outside, aggressively adding to the bill.
And it escalates so quickly. It's not just one momentary slip-up. It's a progressive three-stage collapse. If we harmonize Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see this terrifying downward spiral.
Walk us through those three stages, because they get worse every time.
Stage 1 happens at the gate in the fire. A servant girl, someone who has zero social power or authority compared to a prominent disciple, identifies him. She says, "You were with Jesus of Galilee." And Peter plays dumb. He evades the question entirely. He says, "I neither know nor understand what you're talking about."
It's the classic politician's defense. I don't recall the events in question.
Right. He's trying to slip out of the trap without a flat denial. Then he moves away to the porch. He's trying to get away from the illuminating light of the fire, trying to physically blend into the shadows. This is stage 2. Another girl sees him, or maybe the same one follows him, and points him out to the crowd. This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And this time, Matthew tells us he denies it with an oath.
An oath. He swears on it.
He swears before God, "I do not know the man." Now he is actively bringing God's name into his lie. He is using the monopoly money of his own religious reputation to try and buy his physical safety.
And then we hit the third stage. Now, Luke mentions there was a gap of about an hour before this happens, right?
Yes. Imagine the agonizing tension of that hour. Peter probably thinks he's in the clear, the heat has died down, but then the bystanders close in again. And this time, it's not just a vague accusation. They have empirical evidence.
The accent.
Yes. They say, "Surely you are one of them, for your speech betrays you." You see, Galileans had a very distinct regional dialect. They swallowed their syllables, they slurred their guttural consonants. It's like a guy from deep rural Texas trying to pretend he's a local in downtown Brooklyn. As soon as he opened his mouth, everyone in the room knows he's lying.
That's a great comparison. And John adds a terrifying specific detail here, too, regarding who is in that crowd.
Yes. John tells us that a relative of Malchus was standing there. Now remember, Malchus was the high priest's servant, the exact man whose ear Peter violently cut off in the garden just a few hours ago. This relative looks right at Peter and says, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?"
Oh, wow. So this isn't just someone saying, "Hey, I think I recognize you from a sermon." This is an eyewitness to a felony assault. Peter isn't just afraid of being socially mocked anymore. He is suddenly terrified of being arrested and executed for attempted murder.
Exactly. The stakes just went from 0 to 100, and that pure panic triggers the final collapse. Matthew says he began to curse and swear.
What does that actually mean in the Greek? Was he just dropping a string of profanities?
No, it is much more technical and severe than that. To curse in this specific biblical context means to call down an anathema on yourself. He is essentially saying, may God strike me dead right here on this pavement if I know this man. He is actively inviting divine wrath and judgment upon himself to authenticate a lie. He is utterly, completely disowning his Lord to save his own skin.
There's a really profound psychological and sensory element here, too, that I want to touch on. You mentioned the charcoal fire earlier in Mark's account.
Yes. The Greek word for charcoal fire is anthrakia. It is a very specific, rare term. It actually only appears twice in the entire New Testament. Here, at the denial in the courtyard, and then later in John 21, when the resurrected Jesus cooks breakfast for the disciples on the beach.
When he restores Peter.
Exactly. It is an intentional sensory link. Scientifically, smell is the strongest trigger for human memory. So weeks later, when Peter smells that specific charcoal smoke on the beach with the risen Jesus, it instantly transports him right back to this horrific moment of failure. But the beautiful contrast is that in John 21, the fire is built for feeding him and loving him, not for testing him.
That is such a beautiful, redemptive detail. But back in the courtyard, the climax of the failure finally happens. The rooster crows.
Mark specifically notes it crows twice, which fulfills Jesus' exact prophetic detail. It acts as this piercing divine alarm clock waking up his deadened conscience. But Luke gives us the detail that just absolutely breaks your heart. Luke 22.61.
The Lord turned and looked at Peter.
Just pause and visualize that. Jesus has likely been moved from Annas' wing of the complex over to Caiaphas' wing. Or perhaps they're parading him across the open courtyard to a holding cell. And right at the exact moment the curse leaves Peter's lips, through the crowd their eyes meet.
That honestly gives me chills.
Imagine the weight of that moment. The ultimate perfect man, which is Luke's whole theological perspective, making eye contact with his failing, broken friend. And here is the absolute key to understanding this. It was not a look of burning anger. It wasn't a glare that said, I told you so. It wasn't, you miserable traitor.
How can we be so sure of that? Because humanly, that's exactly what we would do.
We know it wasn't anger because of the psychological result. If it was a look of pure condemnation, Peter might have run away and hanged himself, exactly like Judas did. But the text says he went out and wept bitterly. That is the weeping of a shattered heart, not a bruised defensive ego. It was a look of immense sorrow. It was a look of unconditional love. It was a look that communicated, I am doing this for you, Peter. Even while you deny my name, I am going to the cross to pay for the exact sin you are committing right now.
That perfectly highlights the theological difference between Peter and Judas, because from the outside, they both failed catastrophically. They both betrayed or denied the Lord, but their endings are completely different.
Judas had worldly remorse. He felt bad about the negative consequences. He says, I have betrayed innocent blood. He wanted to undo the financial transaction. But Peter had godly repentance. That look of love from Jesus broke his pride completely. He didn't just want to fix the situation. He desperately wanted his relationship with his Lord back. That is the defining difference.
So Peter runs out weeping into the dark. Meanwhile, Jesus is moved to the main event, the formal trial before Caiaphas and the assembled Sanhedrin.
Yes. Now, we really need to put on our legal hats for this section. Because if the hearing before Annas was a late-night mafia interrogation, this trial is a complete kangaroo court masquerading as the Supreme Court of Israel.
The source material repeatedly calls this an illegal assembly. Let's be really specific for the listeners. If we were modern defense attorneys filing an appeal for Jesus based on the Mishnah, which is the Jewish legal code, what specific violations are we listing in the brief?
Oh, we would have a list a mile long. The Jewish legal system of the first century was actually incredibly advanced and highly ethical. It was heavily designed to protect the rights of the defendant. But in their sheer panic to kill Jesus, they threw every single one of those protections out the window.
Give us the top 3 most glaring violations.
Violation number 1, the timing. You absolutely cannot hold a capital trial, a trial involving the death penalty at night. It is strictly forbidden by their own laws. Justice must be done in the full light of day, in public.
Okay, that's a massive breach. Violation number 2.
The speed of the verdict. In capital cases, if the verdict is guilty, the judges cannot issue the sentence on the same day. They are legally required to wait overnight, fast and deliberate. It's a mandatory cooling off period to prevent emotional mob mentality. But they arrested, tried, and condemned him all in a span of about 6 hours.
It was a total rush job. And violation number 3.
The witnesses. The prosecution is mandated to bring independent witnesses whose stories align perfectly. If they disagree on even minor circumstantial details, the testimony is legally invalid. And Mark 14.56 says explicitly, "For many bore false witness against him, but their witness agreed not together."
In any real court of law, the judge bangs the gavel and throws the case out right there. Case dismissed, lack of credible evidence.
Exactly. But Caiaphas doesn't throw it out. He's desperate. He needs a guilty verdict before the sun comes up and the mass Passover crowds wake up and start a riot. So they try to use Jesus' words about the temple against him. The quote, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." They try to twist that into a terrorism charge, claiming he was threatening to blow up the physical building.
But the profound irony, of course, is that he was prophesying about his own body.
Which they are literally about to destroy.
Right.
They are actively fulfilling the prophecy while simultaneously accusing him of it. But through all of this chaos, all these screaming, contradictory lies, Jesus does something remarkable. He stays completely silent.
Fulfilling Isaiah 53, verse 7. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth.
The Silence of the Lamb. He absolutely refuses to dignify their panicked confusion with an answer. He doesn't debate them. He doesn't offer a legal defense. He just stands there in the absolute sovereign dignity of the truth. And this silence drives Caiaphas completely crazy. The high priest is losing control of his own courtroom.
So Caiaphas has to go nuclear. He has to force the issue to get his verdict.
He does. He officially puts Jesus under divine oath. He says, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God."
Which is another violation, right? Forcing self-incrimination.
It is, but it is also the ultimate moment of truth. Jesus finally breaks his silence. This is the great confession. In Matthew and Mark, he answers clearly, "I am," which is the divine name of God from the burning bush. But he doesn't stop there. He drops what I like to call a prophetic bomb on the room.
He quotes scripture directly at them.
He brilliantly mashes up two very specific verses, Daniel 7.13 and Psalm 110.1. He says, "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven."
Let's really unpack that, because to a casual modern ear, that just sounds like standard poetic religious language. Why is that specific combination of verses so explosive to this audience?
To a first-century, highly educated Jewish leader, this is a declaration of cosmic war. Daniel 7 depicts the Son of Man as a divine heavenly figure who approaches the Ancient of Days and receives an everlasting, indestructible kingdom. Psalm 110 depicts the Lord sitting at God's right hand, which is the position of absolute, equal authority and ultimate judgment. It's also referenced heavily in Hebrews to establish Jesus as the true high priest.
So he isn't just saying, yeah, I'm the Messiah you've been waiting for. He is saying, I am God's equal, and one day, very soon, I will be the judge sitting in the seat of power, and you will be the terrified prisoners standing exactly where I am standing.
Exactly. He is claiming absolute, terrifying sovereignty. He is looking Caiaphas in the eye and telling him, "You are a temporary, corrupt, earthly judge. I am the eternal judge of the universe."
And Caiaphas reacts incredibly theatrically.
He tears his robes, Matthew 26.65.
No, wait. I remember reading in the prep in Leviticus 21, verse 10, the high priest is strictly forbidden to tear his clothes under any circumstances, because the garments symbolize the unbroken wholeness of the priesthood before God.
You are spot on. The law says, "He who is the high priest shall not uncover his head nor rend his clothes." By violently tearing his robes in a fit of rage, Caiaphas is technically, legally disqualifying himself from the office of high priest.
That is such profound historical irony.
It's way more than just irony. It is incredibly deep theology. At the exact moment the true, eternal high priest, Jesus, is revealing himself to the world, the corrupt, earthly high priest, Caiaphas, is symbolically destroying the Levitical order. The old broken system is literally tearing itself apart in the presence of the new covenant.
And the verdict is immediate after that. He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses?
They sentence him to death on the spot. And once that verdict is delivered, the thin veneer of legal civility drops completely. We move into segment 5, the physical abuse. And honestly, this is where it gets incredibly hard to read and process.
The text says, they spit in his face.
Spitting was the ultimate, most degrading sign of contempt in the ancient Near East. It is treating a human being like absolute refuse. Then they blindfold him. They beat him repeatedly with their fists. And they mock him, taunting, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you?"
It's just cruel schoolyard bullying, but on a massive cosmic scale.
It is. And notice the irony again. Prophesy who hit you. He knows exactly who hit him. As the divine sons, he knows their names, he knows their family histories, he knows their deepest secret sins, he knows the exact date they are going to die. But he actively chooses not to speak. He willingly absorbs the abuse.
And this fulfills Isaiah 50, verse 6, right?
Letter for letter. I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. This was written hundreds of years before this night. Jesus is intentionally walking through a script written by the ancient prophets. He is the suffering servant of Mark's gospel, absorbing the violence and the poison of the world into himself.
We've talked a lot about the physical and legal aspects, but let's touch on the spiritual warfare happening here. Luke mentions the hour of darkness in chapter 22. What is happening in the unseen realm?
This is a highly coordinated, massive assault by the kingdom of darkness. Satan is incredibly active this night. We know from the text that Satan personally entered Judas. We know Satan asked permission to sift Peter like wheat. And now, these religious leaders are acting as direct agents of this darkness. The demonic strategy is two-pronged. Crush the shepherd through unimaginable humiliation and death, and completely scatter the sheep through terror and compromise.
And from a human perspective, it looks like Satan is winning across the board. Peter is totally broken. Jesus is beaten and bound. The disciples have fled into the night.
It looks like an absolute defeat. But this is the breathtaking paradox of the cross. Jesus is actually winning by surrendering. He said earlier in the garden, I could call 12 legions of angels right now. He isn't losing because he lacks the power to fight. He is allowing this to happen because it is the only possible way to pay that massive debt we talked about earlier. He is absorbing the darkness in order to forever extinguish it.
So bringing this all together for everyone listening, we've seen the king rejected by his own people, the servant suffering in silence, the perfect man betrayed by his friend, and God in absolute control of the chaos. What does this mean for us today in our modern context? Because most of us aren't facing a corrupt high priest in a Jerusalem courtyard. But you said earlier that following at a distance is a dangerous place for us too.
It is arguably the most relatable, convicting part of the entire narrative. Because if we are honest, we are often Peter. We aren't usually Judas. We aren't maliciously plotting to sell Jesus out for cash. But we are very often Peter. We get into situations in our culture where the social pressure starts to mount.
Give me a practical example of what that looks like today.
Maybe it's at your job. The culture of the office is to cut ethical corners or to mock certain biblical values. The fire of the world is warm. It feels comfortable to fit in and be liked. It is cold and isolating to stand with Jesus and risk being called a bigot or narrow-minded or a religious nut. So what do? We follow at a distance. We blend in. We act like we don't know him.
I don't know the man. We might not say these exact words out loud, but our actions scream them when we laugh at the joke we know we shouldn't laugh at, or we stay completely silent when the truth is being openly mocked in front of us.
Exactly. That is warming ourselves by the enemy's fire. And the stern warning from this passage is, it never stops at the fire. If you stay there long enough, seeking comfort from the world, you will eventually be asked to swear allegiance. Compromise always, inevitably, leads to outright denial.
But there is massive encouragement here too, right? Because as we know, Peter's story does not end weeping in the courtyard.
That is the beautiful hope of the gospel. Failure is not final. If you are listening to this right now and you feel like you've completely denied Jesus in your life or you failed him repeatedly, look at Peter. This is his absolute lowest point. But the book of Acts is coming. Pentecost is coming. Peter stands up just 50 days later and preaches the boldest, most powerful sermon in history to the very same people who murdered Jesus.
So the look of Jesus, that specific look of sorrow and love, is an ongoing invitation to return, not a permanent banishment.
Exactly. He looked at Peter to pull him back in, not to push him away forever.
And there's a serious warning here too, specifically for the Annas and Caiaphas types in our world.
Yes, for the religiously rebellious. You can be incredibly close to the mechanics of religion. You can literally be the high priest and be millions of miles away from God. Annas and Caiaphas fiercely protected their religious institution and their power, rather than recognizing the living truth standing right in front of their faces. They had religion, but they had absolutely no relationship. And in judging Jesus, they actually sealed their own judgment.
That brings us right back to that monopoly money analogy one last time.
It really does. The ultimate theological application of this entire night is this. You cannot pay your own spiritual bill. Peter tried to pay it with fleshly bravado and failed miserably. The high priest tried to pay it with empty ritual and tradition and failed. You must accept the payment being made in that courtroom. Jesus is taking the beating, the shame, and the death sentence so that your insurmountable debt is cleared.
That is an incredibly powerful place to land today.
It is. It's the core of the whole thing.
I want to leave everyone listening with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. We talked deeply about the contrast between Peter and Jesus in the courtyard. Think about the ultimate trade-off that happened that night. Peter passionately denied Jesus in order to save his own skin. He did everything humanly possible to protect himself. But inside that room, Jesus boldly confessed the truth, knowing fully well that it would cost him his skin. He willingly lost his life in order to save Peter's.
That is the gospel in a nutshell.
So here is the challenge for you. Are you warming yourself by the fire of compromise today, trying to save yourself? Or are you willing to step into the cold, stand in the trial, and be associated with the King? Because the story continues, we know that Sunday is coming, but you cannot get to the glory of the empty tomb without first going through the darkest night.
Amen to that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you guys next time.